I would like to hand over to Andrew for an exciting evening. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining.
Good evening, welcome everybody. I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be really, really interesting. So it's a subject that really interests me. This is Dravya Guna, so Ayurvedic pharmacology. And who better to talk about this than Sebastian Pole, a man I'm sure you all know, so no introductions needed. So over to you, Sebastian, and really looking forward to hearing about this subject.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everyone. Good to be with you. Thanks for coming and spending a bit of time with us. Just going to share my screen, and I'm going to spend maybe half hour, 40 minutes going, hopefully relatively briskly, over a wide subject of where do we get our Dravya Guna, really focusing on the sort of herbal side rather than any other ingredients, but that's because that's my area that I know a bit more about, and just looking at areas of quality, sustainability, how can we use our clinical practice to bring about good in our clients' health, but also in the world where they're coming from, and the people growing and harvesting them, and also ensuring that the quality is good. It's a challenging area. There are lots of regulatory issues, and it couldn't really be a better time to have this talk, actually, with World Ayurveda Day, as you said, Thomas, and it being, COP26 up in Glasgow, basically, where there is the, big climate conference. So we'll have hopefully lots of time at the end for a conversation, and we'll look at some of the solutions and, areas we can all work together to get what we want, really. So just a few backgrounds, really. There are over 250,000 flowering plants, and botanists and researchers have looked at the history of use, and about 30,000 of them have been documented for use, for food mainly, clothes, building, but also for medicine. So you can see about half of them, 17,000 for medicines. And I think in the Ayurvedic Materia Medica, about 6,000 different species are mentioned over time. So I certainly don't know that many that well, but it's very wide. Obviously, the plant diversity in India and across the subcontinent is enormous, and we know that there is a challenge, isn't there, where we're getting our plants from, how they're grown, that impact on the environment. I'm not saying that the pressure that the environment is under is because of herb harvesting, but because of food, largely agriculture. There's a big pressure on nature. And I'm very interested in our modern farming techniques, because I think our modern farming techniques are also driving lots of the health issues that we end up treating in clinic as well. And so I think how we treat the land is quite a similar model, if you like, for how we work in medicine as well. And from an allopathic point of view versus a perhaps more naturopathic Ayurvedic point of view. And I want to explore that as we look at the different ways you can get the herbs. And so I thought it'd be nice to have a few pictures. And so here, there are all sorts of ways of getting plants. You can have them grown or from the wild. Now that might sound obvious, but many species come out of the wild. Over 95% of most herbs harvested in the wild by species number come out of the wild. But as we'll see in a minute, by volume, it's about 25% of all the herbs that are used in the world. And so with the pressures on the biodiversity and the ecosystem, it's something we need to take care of. And that haritaki tree on the right, isn't that the most beautiful tree in this incredible grove? So again, large farms, small farms, crops, more commodity crops like turmeric, ginger, things like that are grown on a much bigger scale than things like pipali and some of the, mangista, etc., much smaller scale. So anyway, you get this big range of where the herbs come from. Sorry, it's a bit pucker-based, some of this. I couldn't make it as generic as I'd like, but just to give you an example of some of the ways we've tried to look at things. And I don't think this is a place one arrives at. It's not like there's a destination with this journey. It's an ongoing one, because there's always more to learn and there's more issues coming up. But essentially, you have a central company that we will buy from as practitioners. And they will often work with a range of different partners. And then those partners, which may be in Europe, or they may be in India, maybe more established businesses, then they maybe will work with some suppliers. And those suppliers might have networks out to farms or out to the wild. It's normally quite a long chain, different numbers of people in a chain, but 10 or 8 is quite common in a conventional market. There's good evidence to show the shorter you make your chain, your relationship, if you like, your connection, the better the quality. And if any of you saw the research Tony Booker did at UCL London, really interesting, looking at value chains and how they bring more value to communities when they're shorter, but also you get better quality as well. Anyway, so that's an idea, and that's a sort of principle. In a way, we're always trying to get close to where our food comes from, where our health comes from, and even though our herbs may come from around the world in different places, there is a way of knowing and being connected with them. Just a few pictures of herbs come from all over the world, and in fact, India imports lots of the herbs it uses in Ayurveda. But of course, many of the herbs available to us come, from Europe, Africa, South America, and then over the years, different species have been traded for growing, and so South America is now growing quite a lot of ginger and turmeric, cardamom, etc. Just as India started to grow rosemary and thyme and chamomile. So some of this fairly obvious, quite interesting in a way, lots of cinnamon in the world coming out of Vietnam and Southeast Asia. I think a lot of that cinnamon ends up in India as well. So, there's quite a lot of issues with actual species, probably less so in Europe, but through trade in Asia, there's definitely issues there. Although we always need to be vigilant about the species we're buying and the quality. So as I was saying before, this beautiful picture, wild harvesting cookie, so project up in Himachal Pradesh. So a quarter of all the plant materials used in the natural ingredients industry are from the wild. So, that's cosmetics, skincare, as well as teas and medicines. So it's, millions and millions of kilos. And it can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how it's done and the relationship. It is a big issue, though. And to be honest, most people don't have the rigorous control. It's very complicated in these areas, but more and more there are more engagement from government and local forestry commissions in the relevant areas. So that's very positive. Some of you may have seen me talk about some of these things before, but I'd say I was pretty obsessed with Fair Wild as a certification scheme. I really am a champion of third-party certification. So not just a laboratory, which is always good as well, but to have some specialists in a certain field able to help audit and help you improve. And Fair Wild is this amazing scheme set up maybe 10 or so years ago to make sure that when you harvest something out of the wild, the resource assessment is done in that area. So you're only taking out an appropriate amount of volume. You're not harming any of the other species in the area. And you're also paying fairly and making sure the communities are remunerated properly, because one of the biggest challenges to our supply actually is people leaving agriculture, and particularly leaving poorer villages where they've had quite a lot of income from wild harvesting, which I'm sure any of you involved in buying herbs, are coming across. Some things have got huge life cycles, like, to plant Dibitaki, Haritaki trees, you're going to be probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years before you're getting any decent crops. These trees, these Haritaki trees and Dibitaki trees must be, 70, 100 or more years old. Things like licorice have to be harvested on a 5-year or 6-year rotation. So you really got to make sure you're not unintentionally damaging those yields. Quite difficult to get Fair Wild herbs still. There's only, only a little bit of Triphala that's Fair Wild in India, but there's some more Fair Wild herbs out of Europe. So our favorite, that would be good to look at some of our good friends. Triphala, growing across all ranges in India, lots in the Western Ghats going up to the Himalayas. Some of these trees are enormous, but they are home to many, many different species here's some wild harvesting, and a lot of people in some villages, you know, I think there are parts of the Himalayas where some villages are getting more than 50–60% of their income from wild harvesting, you know, Jatamansi, Kutki, Triphala, etc. This is a project we got involved with where there were lots of little people in the way, and a conservation group we worked with in India went in and helped organize the community so that there was mapping of the area and understanding of the price, sort of full transparency about what people needed to be paid, making sure there's enough distributed decision making between the men and the women and the different groups in the community. Anyway, so it goes into loads of detail, you know, a bit like when we're doing a diagnosis on somebody in Ayurveda, you know, it's a seriously detailed activity. Same as buying the Dravya. Dravya Guna also has got that level of detail, and over the years, scientists have developed expertise in different levels of farming, wild harvesting. Beautiful picture of a hornbill that happened to be harvesting, nesting in a bibitaki tree, and a lot of them are getting cut down, unfortunately, because they're very valuable as timber, but not so valuable as bibitaki. So in this project, we worked out a way to pay enough to give the local community that owned the trees the value over the years, and therefore they obviously see integrity in their ecosystem. So there's a list of some of the CITES herbs that are, you know, on a bit of a watch list, really. I know they're in, you know, Ayurveda makes so many wide ingredients, and I know these are freely available in India, and lots of people, organic suppliers, lots of people offer them. Some of them are, you know, have got limited habitats and struggle to grow. So, you know, sacred herb like Jatamamsi, you know, the oil was used to bathe Mary of Magdalene's feet, you know, legendary herb throughout Ayurveda and, you know, across the world, really, but it grows in very high altitudes and is very endangered due to over harvesting. Although still a lot is harvested because a lot grows in Nepal in the higher areas. There's lots of illicit and illegal harvesting, so it isn't monitored. And when you get, you know, 10 groups coming into an area, they all think there's a patch, that you're therefore not leaving enough to regenerate. But obviously it is an amazing herb, and actually you can grow it in the UK as well if you're able to get hold of some plants. Kutki as well, these high Himalayan plants. This is why they're, you know, endangered, really, because they're difficult to grow in this tough environment, but still a remarkable plant with great science and research on, you know, clearing pitta for liver rejuvenation. These are plants we really shouldn't be using. Valerian Tagara. This grows really well in the UK, actually. I've got a lot of this in my garden, and a bit different than the European one. I think this is relatively easy to replace with the European valerian myself, if it's hard to get hold of, or there isn't a regular project. You know, things like Jatamamsi probably got, you know, very unique properties, really.
Could I just ask? I mean, how many of these have you actually tried growing? Have you tried growing a lot of these? You know, these ones, any successful?
I have. I tried to grow Kutki a lot, and we got some successful projects off the ground there, and we imported it into the UK for quite a few years, and we supplied it to, you know, partner in America. Jatamamsi tried it, failed. There has recently been a Fair Wild project set up in Nepal, amazing project. You know, the auditor has to walk 4 days to get to the project. And so it's, you know, it's a massive mission. It's been a funded project out of Europe, but that supply is mainly going into the essential oil world. But there is a bit there. They're complex species, these. I'm diving into the most contentious area in a way, because I know they are used, but we really shouldn't be using them. It will bring, as a moral issue, you shouldn't use these plants, basically. If you don't know where they're from. I personally would say, you know, we have, you know, unintentionally, through wanting to look after people, you know, lots of plants have been over-harvested, as we know, and we need it to stop. It's not commonly understood in lots of, in India, amongst suppliers I've met, unfortunately. Yeah. And so, I mean, I think, I don't know if we agree, but, you know, I think Kutki, I think, you know, Kalmeg was a pretty good replacement. I know it's not ideal, but does lots of the same things. Tagara, I think you can use European valerian. Jatamamsi, maybe that's a case of combining valerian with Bacopa or something, or with brahmi, you know. So I think there are ways, you know, nature, wish I knew it in Sanskrit, but I'm not good enough at that. But we know it's talked about how to, you know, use, Charaka recommending to use in a species from the local environment. And I think we need to do a bit of both. I mean, of course, we're not going to give up Ashwagandha, Shatavari, Triphala, but these ones where they are more complex. This is Kushta, highly endangered, and actually grows really well in the UK as well. This is up in Lahore, Spiti. So I'm going to zip on because I've got a whole load of things to share, but that was just a little insight into the endangered side and how we could work together to bring about good. And yeah, talk about the Herbal Alliance maybe a bit later, but something I really want to do there is help us have a sort of united front on our sustainability principles as a community. But, you know, I think one of the reasons that we don't want to sort of criticize science as such, but, you know, one of the reasons our world is maybe facing some of the challenges it is maybe a more, you know, pitta aggravated critique view of reductionism. And although that brings many benefits in levels of detail and assessment, it doesn't perhaps embrace, and in this context, a you know, a value chain as a gardener would. And I really do see herbalism, Ayurveda, you know, as a gardener in the sense of how we're trying to work with our clients to help them manifest health and fulfill their potential by planting them in the right place and watering them and nourishing them and giving them the right sunshine. And I don't know, I love that metaphor. For me, it's a sort of ongoing meditation, particularly with enjoying growing plants as well and where you plant them. But it's this, you know, we're trying to capture this prana, the virya, the vitality in the plant, and its color, in its aromas, and its secondary metabolites. And we want to capture that so that when we're giving it to somebody, it has the best chance of having a good effect because, you know, let's face it, it's challenging enough. I know Ayurveda and like lots of traditions that already has the skills of diet and lifestyle and all of those essential areas. But sometimes, you know, every little bit helps. And it's this ability to work. And I think plants work so brilliantly because their ability to be diverse and work on a systems level. You know, some of the Ayurvedic formulas, you know, must have, you know, they've got 40 ingredients in, must have sort of, you know, 2,500, 4,000, maybe more compounds, I'm not sure. So, you know, you're exposed to this incredible, yeah, sort of, you know, tapestry of influences coming in that are having a dialogue with your internal world and shifting it in the direction it's trying to go, because that's what our body, luckily in the right condition, always tries to do. So, you know, acting like a gardener, one of the ways that is a helpful way to think how nature grows things is organically. I know not all herbs are available organically, and often in the wild they'll be natural in that sense. But wild plants are known to have a higher level of secondary metabolites. So the compounds that give the virya, the rasa, the vipak, they are higher in wild plants and organic plants, because although organic isn't totally like wild, it is exposing a plant to natural bacteria, you know, the ecology of the area that will depend on its own defenses to protect itself. And that often means you get these, you know, stronger levels of pigments. And, you know, a reason, apart from the fact that, you know, fungicides, insecticides, you know, kill a lot of insects, and herbicides kill plants, which is, you know, potentially something, you know, anathema to the principles in Ayurveda, I think, of trying to follow dharma and sustain what is there. I know that is a difficult thing to live up to, and of course there are probably some contradictions in all of our lives in some ways, but there's an intent. And I think there's interesting research coming out these days with the knowledge in the microbiome showing that when chemicals are applied to the plants, they really are interfering with the gut microbiota, which, you know, one way of looking at it is, you know, a form of Agni, isn't it, which is then transforming what is in this case pesticides, or is in herbs, into things that influence with our rasa dhatu really, and interact with the mucous membrane and transform into compounds that will then trigger a response in the body. So that's a reason that I think logically means we should be trying where possible to go to organic. I think I was in quite an intense mood when I was putting this together, because it was COP, just talking about the climate change that we face, and the, I won't go into the detail, but there is, we've done lots of mapping of where crops are grown, and there is definitely, India is in a hotspot, and the environmental changes are definitely affecting the quality in plants to do with their sort of carbon cycle and metabolism. Won't go into this. So the reason we need to have this thing called GMP, good manufacturing practice, which is what is relatively easy to implement actually, but it takes thought and time, like everything, is so that we can be assured that we're getting the right species that are not exposed to poor drying or poor growing, poor post-harvest processing. But also, sadly, our world is just so contaminated, and I think we invented the 10 millionth new to nature chemical a few years ago now, and there's just a lot around, so don't want to be too heavy on it, but we'll look at some of these, we'll skip through them maybe. So heavy metals can be intentionally added. We know in Ayurveda that's a whole contentious area because of the Rasa Shastra purification processes, but it is illegal, a lot of inclusion of these things in the UK, so be cautious there, and also obviously make sure you know what you're using. But there have been some intentional poisonings, and that's a different thing altogether, and that's why we need to test for heavy metals. But having said that, they are incredibly safe herbal remedies generally. This is some studies looking at the smaller your bubble and the lower left you are in this graph, which is quite a complex one to look at, the less risk you are exposed to. And so taking herbs generally, which is could be from Chinese, Western, or Ayurveda, is very low mortality risk, when we know lots of lifestyle factors are much more risky. So despite some of the attention needs to be paid, and there are risks, but it's not so extreme as can be made out sometimes. And we just need to, I think, sort of lean into the regulatory process and be as knowledgeable as we can as a community to respond, really. We live in a regulated world. We need to meet that. So this is a quote from Shangada Sangita about what you do in Ayurveda, how you go and collect herbs. I'm sure some of you have seen it. Herbs should be gathered on a good day by someone in a good state of mind, who's clean, facing the sun, silent, and who's paid homage in their heart to Lord Shiva. When collecting from normal land, one should choose one's ingredients from the higher ground. Medicinal herbs which grow on termite hills and dirty places, bulk cemeteries, salty ground, or on the streets are not effective, nor are those which have been affected by parasites, fire, or frost. So some of that pretty obvious, and there's lots more details actually in Ayurveda, of course, than this, but I thought the intent is good in the first paragraph, isn't it? I'm sure many of you have done biochemistry at some point, and as scientists, it is a particular area in Ayurveda of all herbalism, and I think in a way our community would be great as we diversify and grow, that there are people with more special disciplines in these specialist areas. There are many ways to be an Ayurvedan in a way. It can be through clinical practice, it can be through teaching, can be through Dravya Guna in a way, and learning the science and the study of how to identify the correct species and check its quality as well. Right, it's too much, but you need to test. You need to know that when you're getting herbs, it'd be good to speak to your supplier about where are they getting their herbs tested. They do really need to be tested in Europe. Of course, you test them in whichever country you're getting them from first, but you want to test them in Europe so that you can match this sort of qualitative organoleptic feel with the sort of quantitative, what are the potential contaminants, because that it does unfortunately happen. We've all heard about it in the news with E. coli or microbiological issues, mycotoxins. So things like turmeric, chilies, licorice, they get these mycotoxins, which are potentially hepatotoxic. But some of these things are quite dangerous. You do not want to have them in large quantities in your body regularly. Polyaromatic hydrocarbons are from roadside herbs, coming from the roadside, and actually they unfortunately turn up far too much. Pesticides, there are a lot of there are many more pesticides created than there are tests for it. So you want to have, making sure there are many hundreds of pesticides tested for. I think the maximum you can do is about 650, but it's expensive, and so that becomes challenging for suppliers to test for that many. Now, look, pyrrolizine and alkaloids, this is quite an interesting area. This is a natural compound in plants that are there to protect them, and some animals actually thrive on pyrrolizine and alkaloids, but they are toxic to humans at any dose, and they get picked up, and quite commonly, unfortunately, things like chamomile and mint and some low-growing herbs. So these are the sort of watch-outs. There's lots of ways to get better quality with your plants, and so something like Angiographis, the bitter, the most Ticta russer is really in the leaf and not the stem, and so if you get a crop with very high stem levels, which can happen towards the end of its growing cycle when maybe it's going to seed, you get a lot less leaf. Sort of obvious. So the timing of the harvest is so essential as well, as is where you get herbs from. And interestingly, one of the benefits of getting into the pharmacopoeia is you can really work out where some of the best herbs in the world come from, and fennel is a good example, where if you see on this column on the left where it says European pharmacopoeia standards minimum 2%, so the essential oil should be at the minimum of 2%, and you can see which sources have that. These would be from averages of various batches, and then you want to make sure it's got the right amount of anethol in. So it wants to be 2% essential oil, 80% anethol. Anethol is what gives it that sweeter flavor, and you don't want too much estragol. Estragol is considered to be quite dangerous at a high level, and actually it's bitter as well and doesn't taste nice. Although at small levels, it's one of those compounds that triggers lots of health. And you can see the Indian fennel, which is probably interesting for us because we use that a lot. It's got a good ratio, so the ratio is right. It's got a nice amount of anethol. It's a bit low in essential oil, and Egyptian, which is very commonly on the market in the UK because it's the cheapest, is completely the wrong way around. It might have a lot of essential oil, but it's very high in estragol. So many of those sort of details, but in terms of tasting the herbs, this is the thing to really enjoy when you're studying and learning the plants, to really hone your senses to really get to differentiate what you're buying. Show us a few pictures. So, ginger, very hungry crop actually, a bit like potatoes. You can't plant it in the same spot. All of the, turmeric as well is hungry. But a beautiful plant to grow. Very different its effect, obviously, when it's fresh and dry. And of this idea of the doctrinal signatures, I know it's a bit poetic, but the shape of the ginger being related to the digestive system. Let's get through some of these, just to show you a few pictures. Okay, this is what I thought might be quite interesting. So, licorice, it's big scale, the herbal world, really. I know we might use half a kilo or a kilo in our clinic, and we'll be mixing up our blends. But licorice really grows on a vast scale across Europe and Central Asia. And as I was saying before, it's on this big rotation. And actually, this is a project in Kazakhstan. And you have to dig the licorice up. It has to be plowed up, actually, because the licorice roots go down 4 meters into the ground. It's actually our herb with the heaviest carbon footprint as well. We've sort of mapped all the herbs to look at their carbon footprint, because you have to dig it up with a plow, although the area is looked after to naturally regenerate on a 5-year cycle. Lots of carbon gets released, or relative amount, a bit like when you plow any vegetable up. So, few pictures of cinnamon. Sorry, jumped ahead there. Cinnamon in Vietnam, often grown on like a 10-year cycle if it's the Cinnamomum cassia, the really quite strong, pungent one. Here is me looking much younger, many years ago, in Sri Lanka, where they make these amazing quills with a Cinnamomum zelanicum, also Cinnamomum verum, which is often considered the best one in Ayurveda in terms of its sweetness. There's a market stall on the streets of India selling turmeric. I find it one of the herbs that's so varied when I buy it out in the world. It's just one of those herbs you can really get incredibly good. and you know, obviously got much higher essential oils. You can, you know, it's about 2% the European pharmacopoeia of essential oils, which is good. You can get it when you really nice grades up in Northern India. You can get sort of 5% of essential oil, and you get that incredible earthy flavor. You know, it's turmeric comes from the word terra merita, which means blessing of the earth, and you know, it's got that incredible rich aroma. It's grown at quite a big scale, but you can do it as an intercrop, which is quite good for the diversity. We often grow it with things like Tulsi, crops. Ashwagandha, quite a dry, arid region plant. There's been lots of weather changes going on in India, and we keep losing part of our crop because there's too much rain at the wrong time and not enough when we need it. So it is challenged, the weather systems in India for the growers, and that is a bit of a risk. You know, lots of, it's dry. This is in northern Karnataka. I mean, it's so arid. I mean, they don't even wash their plates with water here. They use sand to wash their plates. There's so little water. But anyway, so this is a big harvest. It's all chopped and cleaned in big piles and then taken inside. Shatavari, you know, in Western herbalism, many of the plants that are good for women's health have become endangered, actually. Things like lady's slipper, black cohosh is also endangered. A few other ones, false unicorn. But Shatavari grows so well and is so abundant, and is so effective, isn't it? One of our favorite amazing herbs. And you can see here, dug out a big hole. It's quite a job. Grows normally on an 18-month cycle. Now, Gugul. I know everyone's interested in this very challenging plant, but very fantastic oleo resin for lecania properties, particularly so valuable, and normally needs to be purified in a trifla or some other substance. Bacopa. So some of the things we've done is this traditionally comes from the wild. Bacopa comes from the wild. It's a bit of a challenging plant because it naturally uptakes heavy metals, actually. It uptakes lead from the ground, as quite a few herbs do. Like leadwort or St. John's wort does as well. So I wanted to grow it in a spot so we could make sure that came out. And when you grow it in the same place for a while as well, you can keep the weeds down, because it's traditionally, if you've seen lots of batches of Bacopa, they've often got lots of grass in and things. It's quite a hard plant to grow. So we often just use these really basic drying systems that are cheap and affordable to set up, but effective and can be kept hygienic in India. Gotu Kola. Really great spreading plant. If anyone's got a greenhouse or anything, you can grow some of these things in the UK or on a ledge in your house. So it all starts off really nice and clean, and then it's coming. Tulsi Vrindavan outside everyone's house. I love the fact that, Tulsi is used to sort of cleanse the atmosphere before anyone arrives in your house, and how it can do that as well for your own awareness and prana, really.
But I just wondered, how much were you seeing that as a problem? Generally, stuff that's been coming, has it got worse over the years, or do you think you're winning the battle and it's improving as time goes on?
Well, it's an interesting point, Andrew. I mean, it depends on what the specification is in a way, because having some natural minerals in there, like boron or magnesium or whatever, that wouldn't be a problem. But if you've got some of the more toxic elements, whether that's mercury, chromium, etc., those need to have a specification, and you need to buy that to a standard. And I mean, would you buy the food you feed your family sort of, from some other country without knowing exactly how it's been made and things like that? And so it's the same with the herbs. I think we need to know where they're coming from, and they, just because it's one batch you've tested, that doesn't mean that the next one's going to be safe either, because it doesn't mean your supplier's sending you the herbs from the same place. So, but more broadly, I think that issue that faced the Ayurvedic community, we had to lean into very heavily a decade or more ago, when there were that in the JAMA article in America,
yes,
about heavy metals. I think that's got a lot better, the situation since then. I think in India, to manufacture, you have to have Ayurvedic GMP.
Yeah.
you know, my experience is that isn't good enough for selling solely off the back of that certification into the EU, but there's perfectly good WHO GMP standards.
Yeah.
So I think the situation, you know, I think some things get better.
Yeah.
Science gets more rigorous. There get to be more and more issues on the regulatory front. You know, there's about to be a standard put into the UK for these pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which are naturally occurring. But, you know, how prepared is the industry for these things? There's regular challenges. But I do think the situation is always improving, because I think more knowledge has been shared, and there's a stronger community in a way, you know, the stronger Ayurvedic community demanding a higher standard. I think probably, you know, there's purely my subjective opinions here, and, you know, I'm a bit opinionated, so please, you know, counter check me. But I think probably, you know, Western herbal medicine is a bit more advanced in this regard, probably like the Western, I mean, European, you know, American environmental movement is a bit more progressed than it is in India, to generalize heavily. But there, you know, there are more activism and activity in a way, and stronger regulations perhaps than there is, and so that goes along for food and the environment, and that goes along for herbs as well. So in India it is extremely contaminated, I have to say, with the pesticides and things like that, and we do need to be careful, like we do with our food, because the food system is contaminated, and that is the frustrating thing. Big industry, you know, I don't want, it's not like the whole world is, it's not so contaminated. It's a bit like we get armor ourselves after we eat wrong, or, you know, get exposed to something. We can build up armor, and it's a bit like the world's built up some armor, and it's got a massive case of pitta inflammation, and that problem and that pathology is manifest in our value chain, just as it is in our clinic. And so the herbs as well suffer from some of that. If it is a metaphor that travels across different ideas, but I think it is the case. But it's always been there. I mean, there's a, you know, I set up this website called Herbal Reality a while ago, and there's a great article on there written by a PhD student called Steve Woodley, who's doing some research at, I think, London University, on how you can use testing in mitochondria and look at the efficacy of plants. And he's done a really good piece on the early herb trade. And there's always been, you know, there's always challenges there, you know, storing herbs in humid environments, moving them around the world. It's, you know, it's the oldest story in the book, really. So we need to pay as much attention to that as we do to how we take the pulse, and how carefully we try and connect with our client and be really sure that we're giving something that is genuinely safe. Because we've all traveled around the world, we've all seen the different grades of things, you know, what you can buy in UK shops. You know, if we're practicing Ayurvedic medicine, we want to be giving ideally the best we can. So, and, you know, and I know lots of people are doing that, but like, there are continual challenges.
I noticed even sort of India and Sri Lanka, traveling around looking at a lot of the pharmacies. I was able to go around as part of my, when I was doing my tour of duty over there, and I kind of went to a few places and got to see some in-depth preparations, and it was amazing the different standards that you would see. I mean, some places it was incredible. It was like a sort of high-tech, you know, like the inside of NASA, like they were building a spaceship.
Yeah. Some of it's incredible.
It was so basic, it was unbelievable. It was just a tin shed in the middle of nowhere, you know, kind of everything falling down. And yet, you know, the product was good, nice quality stuff. But just obviously, as a Westerner going there, we're kind of, you know, it's a bit sort of horrifying when you see it.
Yeah, it's under-resourced, isn't it, really? So I think an important thing to say, actually, a simple thing that I think is a way of doing is that, you know, just in all things, you know, when things are, you know, I know this doesn't always apply, but when things have hot water put on them, or they're decocted, or they're made into a tea, or a Fanta, you reduce that microbial load by many counts, basically. So that is one bit of mitigation. And also, we should put this in context that people are only having normally a few grams a day in their diet. We're talking in a sort of micro land here. You know, you're eating, I'm a bit greedy if I say eat a kilo of food a day, you know, by weight. I'm just making it, you know, you're probably only going to have, I don't know, is it 10 grams or something like that, even if you include that as tea you have throughout the day. So I think that, you know, it all needs to be done in the context. There's lots of good stuff. There's loads of, it's just, yeah, my frank opinion would be we could evolve and mature as a community. You know, if you've got, you know, if we're practicing a a medicine in a culture where there is, you can't move if you don't have GMP and licenses and things like that. We could probably improve together and work out how to do that. And then on the fact that we can address the sustainability issues, I think, and many of the social issues we care about in terms of equity of value and making sure that the growers are paid in a correct way and that the ecology is looked after. Apart from the fact it's a very good fun thing to be involved with and very rewarding, it highlights the social challenges that the world we live in. And
how do you go about getting those herbs, and how do you know that the quality is going to be good? Obviously, we all know between us, there are some suppliers that have a good standard and maybe others don't. But what would you recommend for, say, somebody who's, there's a lot of people here watching tonight who'll be very interested in preparing themselves. What would be your kind of fundamental steps to going forward with that and getting everything to start preparing? What would you?
Well, I think that, the basic repertoire of the Ayurvedic Dravya is fully available from, at an, ecological high grade quality. That's fully available from different suppliers in the UK as herbs, as raw herbs that you can maybe get as powders. Then, if you want to prepare some of those things, because you can buy, I don't know, whatever you want to get, butcher or something like that, you might want to prepare. You can buy those that, there are, I can say there's lots of, I'm sure there's some suppliers here tonight, but some of the Western suppliers might have other herbs that the suppliers here they might, some of the Ayurvedic suppliers might have more of the Ayurvedic herbs, but maybe, I don't know, cumin, coriander, sauve, these things are easy to get from, I don't know, Organic Herb Trading Company is the company I like to use, but there's loads of other good companies, Panacea, who else is there, Avicenna, there's lots of companies that do Western herbs. But they do herbs around the world,
So do you think long term, I've noticed, I speak to a lot of Western herbalists as well, and obviously, although the Western herbalists, I know they do have a preference for using a lot of Ayurvedic herbs. So do you see a long-term connection between those two traditions? Do you think maybe we could, a bit like Jurassic Park when they were plugging the DNA with missing pieces, could we sort of plug the missing pieces with Western into the Ayurvedic model if it was more, because obviously the herbs are being grown here, it's all local to us, it's much less complicated to bring that side of it.
I think it's a bit of, for me, it's like we have to do a little bit of everything, so I grow a few Ayurvedic herbs that I can't get much of, that I probably wouldn't use much of, and maybe, my clinic's a bit quieter these days in a sense that I've limited it, but, so I can manage that. There's a bit of stuff growing. There's a bit of stuff you want fresh anyway. Some things are just much better fresh. Of course I use dried Gotu Kola and Bacopa because I can't grow enough, but they are good fresh. And so there are maybe some other herbs that might be useful in that area to add to using Bacopa and Gotu Kola, fresh, like, I don't know, fresh rosemary. In terms of a media rasayana, you're not going to get better than rosemary, and it's an amazing addition into someone's diet and lifestyle. But of course, you want to prescribe the Bacopa, Tulsi, all of that. And, I think making gritters, making definitely decoctions. Getting patients to make teas and decoctions is such I love doing that as a satisfying way so they really get the taste. I think that's really rewarding. I think they're all very accessible. Sure, making some of the the gutties and all of the pills is more challenging. Potentially from a sort of microbiological point of view, that's probably quite, they really go through the mill in the Ayurvedic pharmacy, don't they? And often they get decocted as well. So that, that's really good. And of course, there is a certain potency added through that, that should not be missed. But
yeah,
I suppose I've just adapted my clinic to that way of practicing, and that's what suits me now. And I suppose I've just seen some herbs go by the wayside over the years. But I know, organic herb trading should have quite a lot of the herbs, and I can see Andy here. Andy Jeeva's got it. All the other, I can't remember all the other Ayurvedic companies, but there are lots of good Ayurvedic companies that provide all the triphala and the main core herbs. I think as being a supplier and being a practitioner, just totally as my practitioner head on, I think that articulate as our practitioner what we want, you know, from the suppliers, and just work with them on that, because they're doing the hard miles and building the relationships. And so, yeah, work with those things. And so if there are species people need, it's almost getting together to make sure we protect the pharmacopoeia, because it gets a bit limited. And so we should champion the Ayurvedic businesses that are doing the hard work, because I don't want to dwell on it, because I'm a little bit embarrassed about it, and slightly disappointed in myself that I've not carried on serving everybody.
It was a start. You started the ball rolling and introduced it, and it got it in, and it's made it much more mainstream and accessible. You know, I get it's a huge. I mean, just looking at your slides, you can see what an undertaking is. It's a huge undertaking. So
it's incredible journey. So I think we need to find a way to support the suppliers, and so that they can have the business that is viable. That means the quality we want and the sustainability things can be invested in to make it work. You know, it doesn't just happen really. And what can I say this? I don't know. I can say this. You know, we should not be buying, if anyone is, buying direct from India and not having it through a UK supplier personally, without having it, tested in Europe. I personally think, I understand that might happen, but I just think that's risky for us. And you need to work with a professional to do that. And that is someone that's experienced in buying herbs, because it's a different thing. But I know there's that habit and that tradition, and there's lots of small colleges and teachers that have set up and have got their own tradition and their own amazing pharmacies, and so it's a thing. But maybe we need to find a way for that to change. But I'm sure they're all well manufactured in India when they're these solid teachers and things. It's the environment rather than the process that's the problem.
Interested in you showing those irrigation pictures, and just what do they do about the water? I mean, what about water contamination? How's that all taken?
Oh, Andrew, I mean, you can't even go there. I mean, I swear, you get so many floods in India. You can have, the stuff goes everywhere. It's just risky. I mean, we've grown in the same area for years and it's all fine. And then one year there's something you're like, what on earth's going on? It's contaminated with some pesticide, and you find out there was a flood and it's all come down from this place. And the environment's challenging. A bit like, think of it as food. We don't just go to the cheapest shop and buy food. I mean, these tensions are because we're in a private medical system that isn't funded, and so people are already paying quite a lot to see, to tap all of your wisdom and for you to share it. And then the herbs on top, costs, and so there are those pressures. But I think we need to work to get the value of the plants, these sacred plants that enable us. They're not the sole things that enable us to practice Ayurveda, but they're very an important, integral part of it, aren't they? And I think we need to think clearly about it. Big wake up going on, isn't it? So how can we be part of that awakening?
Definitely. Well, I know there's loads and loads of questions here in the chat window. So does some of the other you guys want to go through the questions, or who normally?
Yes. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Sebastian. We've got a question from Tina. She's asking what other Ayurvedic herbs grow well in the UK?
Well, it depends on where you are in the country and what is going on. But you can grow Tulsi very well in a nice greenhouse. You can put it outside in the summer as well. That's fantastic. Ashwagandha grows here, only as an annual. I mean, grows perennially in India, but only as an annual in my experience, or it sogs off. But I think you could probably grow it in a polytunnel or greenhouse. Think of the temperate regions of India where things grow, sort of lower Himalayas, all those ones grow here. Shatavari you can grow, Tigara, Jatamamsi, Kutki. Not wanting to transgress commercial interest, but I have a very small seed project that I've set up with a very good friend of mine called Ben, who's in fact I should have said actually the amazing pictures of the Jatamamsi and the Tigara that I showed he took about 20 years ago when he was trying to get some of those projects going. Anyway, he's come back to the UK and we've got a small project growing some of these things. So we have Tulsi seed and haven't quite managed to get Tigara yet, but we might sell some plants if we can grow it. But so it's nice to connect with the plants, because that's an essential part, just as we connect with the spirit of the person, and just whatever you can grow, that's definitely good. I'm sure there's many more things I could say, but you can grow licorice, of course. Yusti grows really well here, and it was grown in Norfolk, wasn't it? Isn't that for a long time? And yeah, andrographis you can grow here. Got a lot of it in polytunnels and things.
Was that the is that the Earth Song Seeds project?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think they've got, hopefully the link's gone in the chat window. I was having a read of that earlier because I thought for a minute it was like you were doing your sort of version of the Norwegian seed bank. Is that partly the inspiration behind it, to sort of save those seeds in case anything happens, like a big
Slightly, yeah, it was really. I was sort of thinking, like, I've had the crazy experience of getting involved in pucker and ending up growing insane volumes of herbs from all around the world, and that is the, in a way, that is way they grow best, but also how can we all see what they look like when we live here? We might not use all of them. I don't use, I'm lucky to have a couple of acres, and I do harvest some things, but I don't use all the herbs from my garden, from my clinic. I can't. There's too voluminous. But I love seeing them and tasting them and smelling them, and I don't know, it gives me a connection with them. And yeah, good balance. European herbal world of something called plant spirit medicine. I'm sure some of you have come across it, where you're working with sometimes a live plant, but like also you're doing, Thomas, to drink the tea and feel its intelligence, if you like. It's a wisdom that, you call it spirit, wherever you lie with it. But definitely some intelligence is coming in and altering. There's a dialogue, isn't there, with the plants, and this idea of them being a gardener is something I really find valuable. But maybe there are other ways, depending on how you relate to it. But this permanent relationship we have, this dance, struggle, love affair we have with nature and everything in it, and how we take the herbs in a way that this wisdom we've been so lucky to come across in our lives, or been able to learn from our teachers. It is such a precious and wonderful thing that is so undervalued. I feel that we don't realize I know we do a bit, but our marginalization in a way, and the way that we are, is it too hard to say, discriminated against really in Ayurveda, that it isn't supported as patronized from larger medical institutions and got that level of respect it deserves. And so that's slightly the angle I'm coming at it from. Maybe that's my wounded healer point coming out, that I feel that so many practitioners I know, I just respect so much, and they're such talented, brilliant people, but I feel our tradition and our community across Chinese and Western and in natural practice, I don't think that people deserve. I don't think they get the respect they deserve. And yeah.
Isabella's asking or saying she's been working with small farmers, cooperatives and NGOs for the last 5 years in Ecuador, South America. They've been trying to create value chains for native crops and native herbs that have amazing traditional properties. However, these herbs are not well known in industrialized countries and therefore have a low demand. What is your opinion and view on the future of the herbal medicine growing in South America?
If herbs are my specialist subject, growing herbs in South America is my weakest subject, I'm afraid, or one of them in terms of the general area. But there's a massive herb growing area. I think in terms of the local herbs being known, I don't know about industrialized countries, but more widely, that would only happen probably through sort of scientific research and showing how they work, as long as sharing the story of their traditional use. But herbs do come to the fore, don't they? I mean, it's a sort of rising tide of various species that suddenly become popular. But I mean, pucker, we grow lots of herbs in some parts of South America, but it's obviously an abundant place, isn't it? I think lots of lavender, lots of European herbs have started to get grown there as well, because the climate's quite similar.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. Thank you, Andrew, for just guiding us through the process and for sharing your wisdom and knowledge. So amazing. Go and have a warm, amazing dinner. If you haven't had any dinner already, make sure you have got all the 6 rases and tastes in your food. And we will see you for Marianne Teitelbaum's seminar. I think it's on Saturday the 13th. Carolina has put the date in the chat box. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thanks so much, everybody. Andrew, great to speak with you. Lovely to be with you all. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.